withdrawal strategies. This is really where we get into the meat of the tax discussion, because so far we had only talked about how to obtain money, but not necessarily how to make sure that the tax man doesn't get his grimy little hands all over it. So we'll be looking a little bit into that optimization, as well as just what's the best way to be pulling your money out of your accounts and in what quantities to be doing that. So first step is to look at the other side of the equation. Because in retirement, we have two sides of the equation. There's how much you can spend based on how much money you have, and there's how much you need to spend based on your expenses and all that. So, first step is getting a spending plan in order. Some people call that a budget. If you've never done this before in your life, if you're in, oh no, budgeting is not for people who are in my socioeconomic status, that is, sorry, this is the point in life where it kind of has to be done. It's very essential to know how much you are spending each month, that top line number, organizing all of these things. But even more importantly, we need to take all the, and this is just a random collection. Don't take this as all of the categories. I just randomly threw up some. But we want to know what is actually essential. So for example, we could say 1/5 of our grocery budget is not really essential. And if we needed, we could cut back on that. Half of our entertainment is non essential. All of our travel is non essential. And once you start sorting things into what is my abundant living and what is my necessary living, then you will feel much more freedom of, okay, what if the market has an up year and we're able to take a little more? What if the market has a down year and we are not able to take as much? And you'll have that other lever to pull to um, still stay within your spending capabilities. Hopefully, it's a lever you never have to pull, but having that knowledge is a great first step. Okay, that's the only thing we'll talk about on that side. Everything else is about maximizing how much we can pull out. Step one, we want to look at Social Security. Now, sadly, Social Security is a rather complex topic that varies greatly from individual to individual, couple to couple, really. So I'll just give a few high level insights here. You can start claiming at 62. That's the earliest that you can. 67 for most people is considered full retirement age. And then 70 is the last time that you're able to claim. I mean, you can claim after that, but you'd just be wasting money by doing that. 70 is the last time that it makes sense to claim. So you can claim earlier, you can claim later. The longer that you wait, the more money that you're going to make. So if you claimed early at 62, these are averages we're looking at. It'd only be about $1,500 a month. Whereas if you waited all the way until 70, you're looking more at $2,700 a month. So it behooves you to wait because you'll get a higher paycheck, but you will have not received a paycheck for 8 years from the Social Security Administration. So something to play into the calculation. As a general rule, you don't want to take it while you're working. You actually won't be able to. I mean, you can file for it, but they won't give you the money. They'll withhold it from you until you actually stop working, depending on how much money you're making. They'll withhold most of it. So you can't really take it while you're working, and you wouldn't want to, because while you're working, you have a big paycheck, plus you're adding Social Security on top. Social Security is taxed, so you're throwing yourself into a pretty high tax bracket by doing that. So at the very least, wait until you're done working, but you may want to continue to wait if you want to continue to increase that monthly benefit. As a last point, your spouse is able to get half. How should I say this? The working spouse gets their amount based on how much they've worked. If you have a spouse that didn't work or that didn't work enough to get their own benefit, they will be able to claim at least or up to half of what is the working spouse's benefit. So then you'll have essentially 150% of that benefit for the household. And then whichever spouse passes away first, the surviving one continues to get 100%, even if it's the non-working one. So that's just some high level information there. Again, there's a lot of different strategies of how that is to work. And if that's something you're worried about, just go ahead and give me a call and we can take a look at some more specific situations. All right, pensions. Just want to throw this in there because we have seen it far too many times. They'll often offer two benefits, which is either you can take it as here's a giant chunk of money, take it, go do what you want with it, usually in an IRA, or they will give you a monthly benefit where they're sending you a check every month. Now, we have seen a huge variance of how good those actually are. So you really need to look at the numbers. That's the advice that I'm telling you on this slide. You really need to look at the numbers. Is it going to be better as a lump sum, or is it going to be better as a monthly benefit? They didn't do the math well. They didn't make it equivalent based on your age. There's a lot of really weird math going on there. So actually take a look at the hard numbers, because it may end up being that one is better than the other. So yeah, something to look out for if you have a pension. Okay, so now talking about the taxability of your giant pile of money that we're going to be pulling on, your hopefully $1.5 million that we're pulling on so that you can fund your retirement. Those can be in 3 accounts generally. And most people will know about this, but just so we're all on the same page, I'll go through this as a review. We have our pre-tax accounts. I put IRA up there, but 401k, it's the same thing. In a pre-tax account, you get a tax deduction on the contribution. So the year that you put it in, sweet, we got a deduction. If I made $100,000 that year and I put $6,000 into my pre-tax account, then only $94,000 of my dollars are taxable. Sweet. But then when I pull it out, that withdrawal is counted as income in the year that it is withdrawn, which means in retirement I will be paying higher taxes on my pre-tax accounts. The Roth, again, IRA is just there, 401k is the same thing, but the Roth treatment is the opposite of that. So we forego the deduction on the way in. We make our contribution with after-tax dollars, but when we take it out in retirement, boom, we're clean. Every single cent of it is ours, completely tax-free withdrawals. Wonderful thing. The third option is the taxable account, which is red on both sides. You make your contributions with after-tax dollars like Roth, and then your withdrawals are charged capital gains tax. So it's not great on either end, but they have much more flexibility in that there's no contribution limits and you can pull it out before retirement. It's not a retirement account. It's just a regular account. Generally, we'll push people to max out their IRA and 401k limits before you turn to the taxable account. But if you're a super saver, if you're really putting away a lot of money, or for whatever reason, you may have money there. So that's the third type. So when you're pulling that out, obviously we want the most Roth dollars that we can get, but pre-tax is often going to be a part of the equation. And we get this kind of funny thing where we get to choose how much taxes we pay based on, okay, I'm going to take more from the Roth this year. I'm going to take more from the pre-tax this year. I get to choose how much taxes I'm paying. So that lends itself to this concept that we call filling up a tax bracket. So instead of during your working years, you just make however much, we can now specifically look at, okay, the 10% tax bracket is going to be $12,400 or whatever it is for 2026. I'm going to pull out exactly $10,400 from my pre-tax account to take all of the 10% tax bracket up, but not get a single dollar into the 12% tax bracket. And you'll have to factor in the standard deduction or whatever deduction you're taking as well. But that sort of concept where we're trying to get to the very tippy top of our best tax bracket and not go over. So as a retiree, you think, well, which tax bracket do I fill up? How do I determine what's the best way to do that? And it turns out that the best way to do that is to try to keep your tax bracket consistent throughout all of retirement. And I'm going to show you an example right now of what that would look like. So John, let's say, has his retirement ready and he has $1 million in his pre-tax account and $600,000 in his Roth. And from that, he's going to need to pull off $75,000 each year. That's after Social Security. So he needs all of that coming from these accounts up here. So 3 examples I'm going to pull you through. The first one is when he really does not like paying taxes and he's trying to avoid doing that at the beginning. So he's pulling a very little amount from his pre-tax, only $12,400 to fill up that 10% tax bracket is coming from his pre-tax, and everything else is coming from his Roth. Well, pulling way more from your Roth, you can see he had less in his Roth to begin with, so you can imagine that he's going to run out of money in his Roth. And he does that in 2037. And at that point, he's forced to take everything from his pre-tax instead. And suddenly he's jumped up into the 24% tax bracket. Roth is depleted. We're taking everything from pre-tax. At the end of the day, by trying to avoid taxes early in retirement, he will have ended up paying $245,000 in taxes. Okay, that's example one. Example two is the opposite. We're going to try to get rid of pre-tax. We're going to fill up the 22% tax bracket, pull a ton from pre-tax, and then later in retirement, we could be completely tax-free. Ooh, won't that feel so cool? So doing that, he pulls $105,700 from pre-tax, which is more than he needs to live on. So $12,700 of that gets converted to Roth. By coincidence, it's the same year that the account runs out in 2037. Pre-tax is completely gone, and we've converted a ton of money to Roth so we can spend the rest of retirement just living off of that. At that point, we drop to the 0% tax bracket, start pulling everything from Roth. Awesome. At the end of the day, this scenario, he would have paid $219,000 in taxes, which is better than the previous scenario of trying to put it off. Okay. Last scenario, you can imagine, is going to be filling up the 12% tax bracket. And this is kind of the Goldilocks zone where it really fits for him. Pulling from pre-tax, $50,400, pulling from Roth, $30,400. Using those amounts, neither account is depleted. They get pretty close at the end, but we never have to make a shift. And we have that consistent 12% tax bracket that we said would be best through all of retirement. In that situation, he only pays $162,000 in taxes. Putting all those three numbers up at once, you can see there's a pretty sizable difference when you end up having this consistent tax bracket all the way through retirement. So that's what we recommend. And for this scenario, it ended up being the 12% tax bracket. There's nothing magical about that. What you're going to have to do is go and do some of these rudimentary calculations on your own, figure out, okay, maybe I'm, a little bit on the wealthier side, and the 24 is going to be my Goldilocks zone. 22 would have been too little, or whatever. But just figuring out what that's going to be for yourself, and then trying to keep that consistent tax bracket all through retirement. An additional complication is we didn't include the taxable account when we were doing this. So having that is going to play a different role because the tax brackets are different amounts for the taxable account for capital gains. So, there's an additional level of complication, but just for proof of concept, that's kind of what we're looking to do, is keep it consistent. Okay. So getting back to the young people, how do you decide which of those two accounts you want to contribute to? It's an age-old question. Should I contribute Roth? Should I contribute pre-tax? And there's all sorts of advice out there. Let me just boil it down for you. What determines it? And it is your tax bracket. Is your tax bracket higher today, or is it higher tomorrow? If it's higher today, do pre-tax. If it's higher tomorrow, do Roth. Now, there are many different reasons why a tax bracket could change. 3 specifically that I could think of. I'm going to take you through that. So, professional progression. Most people make more money the older they get. So if you are a young guy like me or like Jade and Joel, you're probably going to continue in your career and do better over time. So doing Roth now makes sense because later you're going to be in a higher tax bracket earning more money. As a rule, if you're in your higher earning years, then perhaps it's time to think about pre-tax because we're already kind of peaking at that, or maybe I had a really good year with a ton of bonuses. Government policy is another thing. We're in historically low tax brackets right now, ever since the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and that was extended by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So if you are of the opinion that the next time there is a change in the tax brackets, it's going to be making them higher, then you might consider Roth because you want to pay those taxes now when the policy is making them lower. And third, the amount in your pre-tax accounts already. So this is the idea that if I have this giant $3 million pre-tax account, when I retire, I'm going to be paying a ton of money in taxes trying to pull all of that money out to live on. So if I already have a ton in pre-tax, I should consider Roth because then retirement won't look as bad. On the flip side, if I have no money in pre-tax, if everything is Roth, then by the time I retire, I'm still going to have some standard deduction. I'm still going to have some of those low tax brackets to play with. So I should consider pre-tax. You want to have some sort of balance between the two. That being said, Roth dollars are just strictly better. You would rather have those once they're already in your accounts and contributed, and that side of the equation is done. We just rather have Roth. So as we're deciding where to put our assets, we want to put the more risky assets in the Roth, the stocks, the high rollers, the ones that are going to grow, because we want to maximize what's in there. And then the pre-tax, we want to put the safety net and our fixed income, real estate, those kind of things that aren't expected to grow as much, but act more as counterweights in our portfolio. We want those to be in the pre-tax account because they're not going to grow as much on average. And we don't want as much growth in the pre-tax account. We want it in the Roth. All right, there are two ways that we can just totally break the system that we were talking about before with the taxability. The first is QCDs. So this is where you take money from a pre-tax account and you give it directly to a charity. Tithing, fast offerings is the most common way to do this. You will take all of that money, and it can never touch your hands. Is the weird part about it. It has to be sent directly from the IRA custodian to the charity. And if you do it that way, then you get a qualified charitable distribution, and that money comes out completely tax-free. It's like you had a green arrow on both sides of that pre-tax IRA. So QCDs are a wonderful thing to do, and I recommend anyone that pays tithing and has money in a pre-tax account, do this. And if you're young, put some money in a pre-tax account with the anticipation that you will be doing this in the future. That being said, the sad thing is you can only do this after you're 70 and a half. So I wish you could do it all through your life because we all pay tithing all through our life, but we can't do it. So you have to wait until you're 70 and a half. That's the one stipulation, but a very good strategy nonetheless. The other one is in-kind donations. It's a similar idea, but it's coming from a taxable account. So when you have a taxable account and you buy a stock, it appreciates, you get the capital gains on it. If you donate an appreciated stock, you don't pay the capital gains. The charity doesn't pay the capital gains. No one pays it. It just gets forgotten, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing for you. And so, as much as you can, pay tithing or do your charity work with appreciated stocks instead of cash to avoid that capital gains. That one has no age restriction. Do it whenever you want. The other fun one with tithing is to pay it every other year. Those flavor of strategies. So the idea is you pay 2 years worth of tithing in 1 year, and then in that year you itemize, and then the next year you pay no tithing, so then you don't itemize and you take the standard deduction, and that ends up being higher than doing it in separate years. You can take that to the extreme. You could pay it once every 5 years and get a giant itemized deduction in a single year, and then standard for the next 4, and then reset. You do have to have all that cash on hand, and that's what kind of makes it tricky. But that can be a good strategy as well. If you are going to go for a longer term, like a 5-year, 6-year prepayment of tithing, I would recommend using a donor advised fund. That means you're not handing that money directly to the church right now. Instead, or whatever charity you want to do, you are putting it in the donor advised fund, which is like a lockbox that says you can only pay this money to charity. So you get to claim the deduction in that year when you hand it into that lockbox, and then every year after that, you peel it out of there and hand it over to the church. The advantage is when it's in the lockbox, it can be invested in the donor advised fund. So we do get some growth over time, which makes it slightly more efficient. Yeah. Those are some kind of involved strategies. So if you have any specific questions, definitely hit me up. That we're experts on that sort of thing. Okay. Last topic here is fixed withdrawals versus flexible withdrawals. So a while ago they came out with this study called the Trinity study, and that created what people have thrown around DIYers as the 4% rule. And it says the day you retire, you take your portfolio value, multiply it by 4%, and that is going to be what you take for the rest of your life from your portfolio. And you can adjust it to inflation, but you never increase that 4%. You never change it. And it's only of the initial portfolio value, not like you're recalculating that every year. When you do that, if you have a $1.2 million portfolio, you'd get $4,000 a month, for example. Um, when you do that, you have a 95% chance of success, which means there's a 5% chance of failure, that you run out of money before your 30-year retirement is over. And that would be a bummer. But still, 95%, that's pretty good. So that was why this was such an important thing, because before that, people thought you could take 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%, whatever, and you would still be fine. And this study realized or calculated and said, no, actually, you got to be much safer. So that's the rule we throw around, is the 4% rule. But that's when it's fixed. Instead, a much better strategy is to do flexible withdrawals. So instead of setting that flat amount, you say, I'm going to take out based on how my portfolio did. If it did a little better, I'll take more. If it did a little not as well, I won't take as much. And by doing that, you end up giving yourself the ability to take far more than 4% and even to grow over time. So it uses what's called these guardrails, and these are these mathematical formulas that you can Google and throw into an Excel sheet and do in an afternoon. It'd be a very profitable afternoon for you. And it basically says if your portfolio grows a certain amount, you give yourself a pay raise. And if it falls a certain amount, you give yourself a pay cut. And you're recalculating at the beginning of every year, has my portfolio hit those amounts? When you do that, you end up being able to take even 5 or even more than 5% starting on day one. Plus, there's a chance to increase later, and there's far more chance that you increase than there is that you decrease. Hitting the upper guardrail is much easier than the lower guardrails. There is no longer a chance of failure because you're always adjusting. If your account balance falls, then you just give yourself a pay cut. So it really does take that weight off your shoulder of, there's not a 5% chance that I'm begging on the street. But you do need to be a little bit more flexible, and that's why we talked in the beginning about knowing what your necessity is versus what your abundance is. You need to have a little bit more flexibility, but it allows you to spend much more money through the course of retirement to do flexible withdrawals. So showing you a little graph of what that would look like. On the bottom there, we have the blue line is your portfolio value, and the green and the red are your guardrails. So we could see it goes for a little bit, and then after a few years, it hits that green, and we see that green dotted line, and that means that we got a pay raise. On the top, you can see started at $5,000, 5%. Now we're up to $10,000. We got a pay raise. And then goes along, hits another guardrail. Now we're up to $15,000. This is just a random example scenario, but just to show what it would look like. And then you hit another guardrail. Oh, now we're taking $20,000 a year. This is sweet. And then that is the .com crash, because this is a historical thing. We hit 3 lower guardrails in a row, and then another one in 2006, it looks like. So we kind of get back down, but still we're way above the 5% or the 4% fixed, and it usually ends up being much better, though you do have to stomach a little bit of flexibility to do this strategy. Usually ends up that you spend much more money in retirement. So this is what we recommend, and this is what we help our clients do as well, is monitor these guardrails and see if their spending plan needs some adjustment. All right, that was the end of it. I have all of these as a summary slide for you if you want to take a screenshot of that. And then there's this quote that we all read together last time, so I'll just leave that up there. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate your support. And as always, if you got any personal questions or things about your own situation that you want to talk through with me, I'm happy to do that. No problems at all.